Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're from. So, welcome to this research seminar by Professor Sachin Jaiswal. I'm sure Sachin is a very popular researcher because for this topic, getting already 20 plus is a big thing, Sachin, for sure. Today, Sachin is going to talk about to us on directed fixed charge multi-commodity network design problem. His approach is based on a cutting plane using polar duality. So a bit of background about Professor Jaiswal. He is a faculty member in the production and quantitative methods area at IIM Ahmedabad. His research areas include facility location, network design, large-scale optimization, and game theoretic models for supply chains. He has a long list of publications as well in top journals such as European Journal of Operational Research, TRB, Computation OR, Annals of OR, Journal of Global Optimization, and several others. He also teaches courses in core areas of operations management and math modeling. He also offers doctoral courses in large-scale optimization and game theory. So Sachin has obtained his PhD in management sciences from University of Waterloo in Canada, and has an MTech from IIT Bombay and a BSc from Bhagalpur College of Engineering. So without much delay, I would give this floor to Professor Jaiswal. So it's all over to you, Sachin. Please go ahead.
Yes,
And,
thank you.
and just to tell others, if you have questions, please write in the chat box, and I'll be also available to moderate that. And I'm sure others can also unmute and directly ask their question. Is that okay, Sachin?
Yeah, sure.
Please go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks, Devjit, and good evening, everyone. So my talk today is based on a piece of work that I recently completed with Professor Yogesh Agrawal and Professor Vakyaneja, who are co-authors on this work. And I'm glad that Professor Agrawal kindly agreed to my request to join me for this talk and possibly rescue me in case I'm fielded some difficult questions from the audience, since most of what I'm going to present today is something that I have learned from him. So as you may very well guess from the title that this talk is going to be somewhat technical. But I'll try my best to explain the technical concepts in as simple words as possible and possibly using illustrative examples wherever possible. So let me explain the problem using this simple example that you see on the slide. So what we have is a graph consisting, graph G consisting of a set of nodes denoted by capital V and a set of arcs denoted by the letter capital A. We have a set of commodities given by a pair of nodes. And a demand Dij to route the commodity from node I to J. So for example, in this case, this is a demand that needs to be routed from node 4 to node 3. And each arc has its capacity limit, which is denoted by CA, beyond which it cannot support flows of commodities through it. So which in this example is given by the first of the pair of numbers that you see enclosed within two arcs, right? Okay. And using an arc A to route any commodity through it entails a fixed charge, which is denoted by F of A, and a variable cost per unit of flow, which is denoted by G of A. So the fixed cost is denoted by the second number that you see here in this pair. And the variable cost for this particular example, we have assumed to be 0. So whenever you route a flow, you only incur the cost to actually open the arcs. And once you have opened the arc, you can send any amount of flows through the arcs, and there is no variable cost for this particular example. But in general, there will be variable costs as well. So with this given data, the problem is to decide, number one, which of these arcs to open. So for that, we have XA is equal to 1, which is if arc A is used, and 0 otherwise. So in this figure, any arc that you see in red is actually the one that we have decided to open. Any arc in gray indicates that arc is not open. So we have decided not to open in the solution, right? So that is a binary variable. Plus, we also need to decide how much of a commodity K, and a commodity K is denoted by a pair of nodes. So for example, how much of the commodity, let's say from 4 to 3 you want to send. So that is given by this variable yka, which denotes the amount of commodity K to flow on arc A. Now, what is the objective? The objective in this problem is to minimize the total cost of setting up the arcs by using as few of these variables as possible, and plus the variable flow cost, which involves these variables. So as you can see, this is a mixed integer program, a set of binary variables plus set of continuous variables. Now, this is something we will refer to as directed fixed charge multi-commodity network design problem. So let me tell you what is the significance of the word directed here. So the directed actually refers to the fact that if you look at any edge between a pair of nodes, for example, between a pair of nodes 2 and 3, there are two edges, one going from 2 to 3 and the other going from 3 to 2. So there is a direction associated with every edge, and a directed edge, we call it as an arc, right? So what it means is if you want to route a flow from 2 to 3, you must open this arc 2 to 3. If you want to route a flow from 3 to 2 instead, you must open this arc 3 to 2. But there are problems where actually there may be only one edge between 2 and 3, and no matter which direction you want to route a flow, you have to open that arc, open that edge, right? So that's the word. That's why we are using the word directed, because there are directed edges. And next, the fixed charge is obvious because we have fixed charge. We incur a fixed charge whenever you want to use an arc. Why the word multi-commodity? So there are also network design problems where you have single commodity, but here every pair of demand nodes actually represents a commodity, right? So for example, you want to send, so what from 2 to 3 we want to send something, and that's one commodity. From 2 to 4 we want to send something, and that's another commodity. So that's why we have the word multi-commodity here. Okay, so I hope the problem statement is clear. Now let's look at the applications for this problem. So this problem.
Sorry, may I interrupt a question?
Go ahead.
So if you have multiple commodities that have to go from, let's say, 2 to 3 and 2 to 4, and is constructing a single arc sufficient to send both the commodities between 2 and 3, or do you want to construct that arc kind of twice?
No, so between a pair of nodes, there is only one commodity. So what we mean by multi-commodity is that different pairs of nodes actually represent different commodities.
No. So let's say you want to send a commodity from 2 to 3.
Right.
And also send it from 2 to 4.
Send from 2 to, so these are two different commodities, yes.
Yes, but the route you are taking for 2 to 4 is via 3, because maybe, I don't know, 2 to 4, the direct route is very costly, let's say.
That is possible, yes.
Yeah. So now the arc 2 to 3, do you want to construct twice or something like that for each commodity, or is it a single pipeline?
Once you have opened an arc, it can be used to route any flow, any commodity.
Okay.
The arcs are not commodity specific.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Now, so we will often refer to this directed fixed charge multi-commodity network design problem using the acronym DFC&D. Yes, Dipesh, please go ahead.
Sachin, this capacity that you have, let's say between 2 and 3, you have a capacity of say 10.
Yeah.
Does that mean that X23 plus X32 has to be less than 10, or it's individual? This 13 that you have from between 2 and 3, the arc capacity of 13.
Right. So that's a question. Yeah. So that is actually individual capacity for each of the arcs. So this, if you want to send something from 2 to 4, this arc has a capacity of 13. If you want to send something from 4 to 2, it also has a capacity of 13. But they could have been different.
Okay, fair enough.
For simplicity, we are using a single number.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll refer to this problem as DFC&D in short. Now, so there are numerous applications of DFC&D. The literature talks about its application in telecommunication networks, its applications in goods transportation networks, and there are several other applications of this problem. Now, how do we model it mathematically? So if you look at the mathematical model, it's quite simple to understand. We have, in the objective function, we have fixed costs, which involve the binary variables XA. We also have the variable cost for the associated with the flow, which uses the flow associated variable YAK, right? And we have a set of constraints, which are the usual flow balance constraints, which generally arise in any network flow problems, right? And this flow balance constraint we have for every node. At every node, we want to maintain the flow balance. And for every commodity, we want to make the maintain the flow balance in the sense that whatever is coming into the node should actually leave the node, right? And this set of constraint actually is the arc capacity constraint. So if you have a capacity on an arc, you cannot route more flow than what is supported by the capacity of that arc, right? And then this is your non-negativity constraint on flow variables and your binary constraints on your arc variables. Okay, so this is an MIP, mixed integer program. Now you can solve it by giving it to a solver. If we solve the given mathematical model, which is an MIP for the 4-node example that we have described, it produces an optimal solution like this. So here, the arcs in red actually indicate that they are open. The arcs in gray indicate that they are not open. So these are the arcs, you can see these are the arcs that get open. And plus you will have the values of the flow related variables, which will tell you how much to route on each of these arcs of a particular commodity, right? Okay, now if I solve the LP relaxation of this problem, which is the first step that you would do in solving an MIP, right? So if you solve the LP relaxation looks like this, highly fractional, right? So what it means is here you have 0.62, that means this arc is open to the extent of 0.62 in the LP solution that you have, right? And because this is a minimization problem, the solution to the LP relaxation gives you a lower bound to the optimal solution to the MIP, right? Okay. Now, if you compare the IP solution and the LP relaxation solution, comparing the two, you can get actually a measure of the optimality gap. So the optimality gap of the solution represented by the LP relaxation is 210 minus 155.293923 divided by 210, which is actually 25.75%. So there is an optimality gap of 25.75%, and you have to somehow close this gap to 0 to get to an integer optimal solution, right? And how would you generally close this gap? So the common approach is actually give it to branch and bound, right? So the branch and bound tree, but remember the branch and bound process is an expensive process, right? So if you have a large optimality gap at the root node given by the LP bound, then it will take a lot of nodes to actually solve this problem, which can be very time consuming. So the question is, if we can somehow reduce this optimality gap before giving it to the branch and bound search tree, then we can actually save a lot of time in the branch and bound search, right? So the question is, how can you reduce this optimality gap before giving it to branch and bound search, right? So that we can do by using valid inequalities. So I'm assuming that probably not everybody in the audience knows what is valid inequality. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining what valid inequalities are in very simple language. So consider a polyhedron P given by the set of constraints which are boundaries of which are given in using this black lines, right? So for our current problem, D, F, C, and D, these are the set of constraints. And if we relax the binary constraint and substitute it by its relaxation, which is any value between 0 and 1, then this set of constraints will actually give us this polyhedron P in our current example, right? Now, what is the set of integer feasible solutions? So anything inside this was a feasible fractional solution to the problem. If you only take the integer values among them, then that is our integer feasible solution to our problem, right? Okay. Now, you can actually enclose these integer feasible solutions using a blue polyhedron, right? And this blue polyhedron actually is called a convex hull of all the integer solutions, right? Now, if anything inside this is actually feasible. And if you look at the convex hull, so one important property of the convex hull is actually all the corner points of this convex hull are actually integer feasible. You see, this is integer feasible, this red dot is integer feasible, and so on, right? So what that means is, if you solve this problem over the convex hull as an LP, right? If you solve the LP over this convex hull, then you're guaranteed to get an optimal solution, which is guaranteed to be integer, right? So we'll always get an integer solution as the optimal solution. That means you can completely avoid a branch and bound search, which is expensive. But this makes sense only theoretically, because if the original problem is difficult, then finding out the convex hull, characterizing its complete convex hull is equally difficult. So if the original problem is difficult, you cannot actually get its convex hull easily. But the good thing is you don't need the complete convex hull. As long as you can approximate this convex hull, you can actually do something better than just giving it to branch and bound. So the question is, how can you approximate this convex hull? We can do this using some valid inequalities. So is this clear so far? Now we'll get into valid inequalities. So if you, let's say, go to the original LP relaxation of the problem, which is given by this black polyhedron. If you solve the LP relaxation, let's say your LP optimal is this point, right? Now, what is a valid inequality to this problem? Let's say this inequality says anything to the left of this line is valid. That means any solution to the left of this is a feasible solution to your problem, right? Of course, you can see that all your integer feasible solutions, right? They are all valid because they are all they all satisfy this inequality, which is given by this line, right? So this is a valid inequality to this problem, to this convex hull, as well as to the polyhedron given by the LP relaxation. So this is a valid inequality. But this is useless because this is not going to serve any purpose. So let me show you what will be a useful valid inequality. Now this is a useful valid inequality. Why? Again, you can see that all the integer feasible solutions are they satisfy this valid inequality. This inequality says that any solution to the left of this line, they are valid. And you see all these integer solutions, they are satisfying this inequality. They are to the left of this line. So this valid inequality is satisfied by all the integer solutions, right? So that's why this is a valid inequality, but it actually is not satisfied by some of the fractional solutions, right? And we are not interested in the fractional solution. We are only interested in the integer optimal solution. So what it does, if you use this valid inequality, it will actually remove the current LP optimal solution, and it will actually bring you closer to the integer optimal solution. So if we keep adding this progressively, we'll actually keep getting closer and closer to the integer optimal solution. That's the idea, right? Okay. Now you can do something better than this. Now this is again a valid inequality, because you see all the integer feasible solutions are to the left of this line, and this inequality actually says anything to the left of this is valid, right? Now this line actually, you see this actually touches the convex hull at this point. So any valid inequality that touches the convex hull is said to be face defining. Is that clear? So this valid inequality defines a face, which is actually in the face is this corner point, right? Now a valid inequality can touch a convex hull in several ways, right? I can rotate this and this will actually touch this convex hull along this line. I can rotate it differently and this can touch along this line and so on. You can see that, right? Now, so I can actually rotate this. If I rotate this, then this will actually touch this convex hull along this line. You see this, right? And this line is actually a facet of this convex hull, right? And this valid inequality is said to be facet defining for this convex hull. So now you can see actually all the blue line segments of the convex hull, they are all facet defining for the convex hull. They are all the facets, right? So now if you can somehow get all the facets of the convex hull, you can construct the complete convex hull, but getting all of them will be difficult. We'll try to get probably some of these facets which are necessary to get to the optimal solution. Or if we can't get to the facets, we'll try to get some valid inequalities, maybe face defining. That's the idea, right? Let us now see how do we do this for the current example. Is this clear so far? So this is polyhedral theory that I have described in very brief, right? But if you have understood this, I think this will be okay for understanding the rest of the talk. Okay, so let's go back to our original problem. Now, the question is, how can we generate valid inequalities for this problem? Now, remember, this actually was the LP optimal solution. Remember, the objective function value was 155.923 for the LP optimal, right? So this is LP. We are starting with the LP optimal. Now what we'll do is to generate a valid inequality to this problem. Let's consider a partition of this graph. So this partition, what it does, it divides the graph into two halves. So on one side of it, you have nodes 2, 1, and 4. And on the other side of it, you have node 3, right? And we call this a two partition of the graph because it divides the graph into two different parts. Is that clear? Now, let us look at the total demand that needs to flow from the side containing 2, 1, and 4 on one side to the other side that contains node 3. Yes?
When you say two parts, are you meaning two connected components or just two disjoint set of vertices?
Two disjoint set of vertices, and they have, and we'll show actually they have to be somehow connected. Otherwise, you can't route a flow from one side to the other.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, suppose, for example, you are cutting. I see. Okay. Yeah, they will be connected components. Okay, understood.
You need to connect them. Otherwise, you can't route a flow from one side to the other side. And from one side to the other side, there is a demand that needs to be routed.
Okay.
So become clear in a moment. If not, we can again come back and address this question. So now, if you look at the total demand that needs to be routed from one side that contains nodes 1, 2, and 4 to the other side that contains only node 3, right? So how much is the total demand? So the problem parameters are given on this graph on the very right extreme, right? So let's look at, so remember the numbers on the periphery of the graph, they represent the demands. So from node 1 to node 3, how much is the demand? The demand is 8, right? Node 2 to node 3, the demand is 5, and node 4 to node 3, demand is 2. So the total demand is, sorry.
Excuse me, second, small correction. Node 2 to node 3, the demand is 8.
Yeah, yes.
Look at the direction of the arrow.
Yes, sorry, I just realized it. Thank you. So node 1 to 3, there is a demand of 8. If you look at the direction of the arrow, node 2 to 3 is again 8. Look at the direction of the arrow, and node 4 to 3 is 2, right? So the total demand is 8 plus 8 plus 2, which is 18. So you need enough arcs with enough capacity so as to support a flow of 18 from this side of the partition to the other side, right? And now what are the arcs that are going from this side of the partition to the other side? You have arc 2 to 3, you have arc 1 to 3, and you have arc 4 to 3, right? So you have arc 1 to 3, 2 to 3, and 4 to 3. And the respective capacities, you can look from this graph, they are 14, 13, and 10, right? So what it means is we should open enough arcs such that the total capacity of these arcs is at least 18 to support this amount of flow from one side of the partition to the other side. Is that clear? And that's a valid inequality. And this is called a cut set inequality. And this cut set inequality is actually the cut set entering into node 3. So there are different cut sets that we can think of, but let's look at this cut set. Okay, so this is a valid inequality. Why? Because this has to be satisfied by any feasible solution. Okay, but if you let's see whether this is already satisfied or not. So if I substitute the solution from the LP relaxation for these variables x13, x23, and x43. So if you look at the LP relaxation, so x13 currently is 0.57. See that along this arc. X23 is 0.62. So x23 is 0.62, and x42 is 0.20. Right. So what I've done is I've substituted the values of x13, x23, and x43 from the LP relaxation. Right. And if I evaluate the expression on the left hand side, this turns out to be 18.04, which is greater than 18, which is what we needed. So it's already greater than what we needed. So this inequality is already satisfied, and that will always be true because our flow balance constraints actually ensure that this equality will always be satisfied. Because flow balance constraint says that if you have some demand at a particular node, you should send enough flows to satisfy the demand, right? So, and this actually cut set inequality is an aggregation of the flow demand, flow balance constraints. Okay, so the question is, what is the use? If they are already satisfied, this inequality is already satisfied, then what is the use of this inequality? Now, what we can do is we can derive actually other inequalities from this cut set inequalities. Let's see how. So this was a cut set inequality, right? Now, if you see, you need in arcs with at least as much capacity as 18 to support the flow of 18 among them, right? Now, if you see, look at, let's say, look at arc 4-3. Arc 4-3 has a capacity of only 10. So what we immediately see is that arc 4-3 is not sufficient to support a flow of 18. Is that right? So if arc 4-3 is not sufficient, then between the remaining two arcs, 1-3 and 2-3, you should open at least one, because arc 4-3 in itself is not sufficient to support a flow of 18. Is that clear? So that means between x13 and x23, between these two arcs, we should open at least one to support a flow of 18. Right? Let me see if there is any question on the chat box. Okay, I think, yeah. So between arc 1-3 and 2-3, at least one of them should be open. That is immediately obvious from this. Is that clear so far? And this is called knapsack cover inequality. So usually you'll see a knapsack cover inequality with less than equal to constraint, but you also have knapsack inequality with greater than equal to constraint. So this is a knapsack cover inequality, right? That we derive from this cut set inequality. Now let's see whether this knapsack cover inequality is satisfied by the current LP solution or not. So now I can substitute the values for x13 and x23 from the LP relaxation. So x13 was 0.57 and x23 is 0.62. So 0.57 plus 0.62 is 1.19, which is already greater than equal to 1. So this is already satisfied, right? So then what is the use of this? Well, let's see, let's look at other cover inequalities that we can generate from this. Now, so far, what we said is this arc 4-3 has a capacity of 10. So this in itself is not sufficient to support a flow of 18. Similarly, if we look at, let's say, arc 1-3, arc 1-3 also has a capacity of only 14. So in itself, it cannot support the flow of 18, which is required here, right? So that means if you x13 is not just sufficient, then between x23 and x43, you should open at least one to support this flow. So this is another knapsack cover inequality, right? Now let's see whether this is satisfied or not. So if you substitute the values of x23 and x43, so x23 is 0.62, x43 is 0.20, and 0.62 plus 0.20 is 0.82, and this is not satisfied. So that means if you add this constraint, then that will bring you closer to the IP optimum. This will actually remove the current LP solution, right? And it will bring you slightly closer to the integer optimal solution. So this is a valid inequality and a useful valid inequality, right? Because current solution actually violates this inequality. Now so if we add this valid inequality to the current problem, current LP relaxation, then what you see is actually the solution changes. So here, the figures that are indicated in red, those are the only variables that are changing from the previous solution, right? And the LP bound actually improves marginally from 155 point something to 156 point something. So there is a marginal improvement. Okay. Now let's see if we have some other knapsack cover inequality that we can derive from this cut set inequality. Now we can also say that using the same similar argument that 2,3 itself has only a capacity of 13. So this itself is also not sufficient to support a total flow of 18. So that means between the remaining two arcs, 1,3 and 4,3, you should open at least one. And this gives us the knapsack cover inequality, which is x13 plus x43 greater than 1, right? Let's see whether this is satisfied. If you substitute x13, so the value of x13 is 0.57 and x43 is 0.20. So 0.57 plus 0.20 is 0.77, which is less than 1. So this constraint is not satisfied either by the current LP solution, right? So if you add this inequality x13 plus x43 greater than or equal to 1, this will actually remove this current LP solution and it will bring you closer to the integer optimal solution. So let's add this. So we have, remember here I have not added the previous valid inequality. I'm just showing what will happen if I add only this valid inequality. So if you add this, here this valid inequality actually does a little better than the previous one. It improves the bound from 155 point something to 157 point something. right? Okay. Now what we see is actually there are two, so there were three knapsack cover inequalities that we actually derived from this. One was already satisfied, so was useless. Two of them were not satisfied, and we could add any one of them, and any one of them actually would actually help you improve your lower bound. Now, if you have more than one valid inequality which is violated, the question is which one should you add first, right? And that problem is actually addressed by something called separation problem. So you can write an optimization problem. So for example, if you have knapsack cover inequalities, the separation problem is well known for this. So you can model this as another optimization problem, which will give you precisely that knapsack cover inequality, which is the most violated by the current fractional solution. All right. So that is well known in the literature. You can solve your separation problem and find out the one that is the most violated. Okay. Now the question is, can you do something more than this? Because these are all well known in the literature. Well, we can do something more. Let's see how. Let's go back to the same cut set inequality that we have, which says that from this side of the partition to the other side containing node 3, you need to route a flow of 18 units, right? And you should have enough capacity on the arcs to support them. Now, if you see, 1,4 has a capacity of 14, 2,4 has a capacity of 13, and 3,4 has a capacity of 10. So none of them in itself is sufficient to actually support the flow of 18. So what we can immediately see that you need at least 2 of them to open. Unless you open at least 2 of them, you cannot actually route a flow of 18, right? So you must open at least 2 of them. So you see, if you open 1,4 and 2,4, that gives you a total capacity of 27, which supports a flow of 18. You can open 2,4 and 3,4. The total capacity is 23, which can also support a flow of 18. Or you can open 1,4 plus 3,4, and the total capacity 24, which is greater than 18. So what it says is you must open at least 2, right? And this is another kind of inequality, which is also well known in the literature, and this is called as minimum cardinality inequality, right? Okay, now let's see whether this is satisfied by a current LP solution. So again, I'm looking at the current optimal LP solution. So if you substitute the values of x13, x23, and x43 from the current LP fractional solution, x13 is 0.57, x23 is 0.62, and x43 is 0.2, and they add up to 1.39, which is strictly less than 2. So that means that this inequality is actually violated by the current LP optimal solution. So if we add this inequality, this will remove the current LP optimal solution, and it will help you get closer to the integer optimal solution. So this is a useful valid inequality, right? Now, if we add this, because this is useful, let's add this and see what happens. If we add this, and now you see your solution changes to this. It is still fractional, but this is actually now closer to your integer optimal solution in the sense that your lower bound has improved from 157 point something to 163 point something. Right? Okay. Now the question is, so far we have talked about knapsack.
There is a quick question.
Okay, sure.
By Sumit. He suggests that there's some the top equation. I think previous slide there was a question.
Okay. x14, 14 into x14. Yes, Sumit, can you tell me where exactly?
I think it should be x13 and x43 and 23. In the topmost equation. Subscripts on the variables are wrong, I think. The partition
it would be 14x13 plus 13x23.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it will be 1, 2, 3, and 4, 3.
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
The coefficients are.
Yes, sorry. The
doesn't matter.
Correct. They are 1, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3. The cut set inequality should also have 1, 3, 2, 3, and 4, 3. Sorry. Despite actually going through it so many times, you are still not able to spot the mistake that the audience can spot it so quickly. I'm sorry about it. Yes, so that's right. Thank you, Sumit.
Sajid sir, can I ask one question here? Yeah. So we saw like you generated. If we generate more than 2 valid inequalities, and then we saw that okay, adding one might be much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
is it guaranteed that when we add more and more, there is always going to be a marginal improvement, or
what you will do is you will add. So once you have violated an inequality, you will add it, and find another violated inequality which is violated by the current LP solution after adding the first one. So if another valid inequality is violated, adding this will of course improve your lower bound.
All right. So every time you add it and again,
right.
Okay. So you have to update, like once you add it, you have to update whether the previous one is still violated.
So right now what I've done is I have discovered the valid inequality, but I'm not adding. I'm actually still going with the LP relaxation and I'm adding to it.
Okay.
Add this, solve this again, get a fractional solution, and see what is an inequality violated by the solution. That's how we do it.
But then adding any violated valid inequality will definitely improve.
Yes,
right?
It will at least remove the current optimal fractional solution.
All right. Yes.
Sachin, but will a violated inequality of this form always exist for this problem? That is, this knapsack or?
That's a very good point, and that actually brings me to the contribution of my research. Okay. So now the question is, we have identified two classes of valid inequality which are well known in the literature. One is knapsack cover inequality, the other is minimum cardinality equality. The question is, what do we have any valid inequality beyond these two, right? So for this, let me consider a knapsack problem which is given by this inequality, right? So if you look at the polyhedral formed by all the feasible solutions to this valid inequality, because this is a problem in only 5 variables, it is quite possible to generate all the facets or generate the complete convex hull of this problem. So there are specific softwares, and COTA is a software which actually helps you generate all the facets of this of the convex hull of this problem. But this is not possible practical for a large problem, because generating the convex hull of a problem is as difficult as solving the original problem. So this is possible only for small instances. So because this is a small problem, we just wanted to see actually, are there any other inequalities, because this is an abstract inequality, are there any other inequalities which are valid for this, or which define the facets for this polyhedron? And you can see the facet number 2 or facet number 3, they are actually of type, you can recall they are of the type minimum cardinality inequality. But if you see the number one is neither a knapsack cover inequality nor a minimum cardinality equality, because minimum cardinality equality had, you will not have a coefficient of 2 on the left hand side. All of them had coefficients of 1.
Sachin, may I interject for a second?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, Sachin.
Yes, Professor. Yes.
Yeah. All I wanted to say was that inequalities 2 and 3, although they look like minimum cardinality inequalities, but they are actually not. Because the minimum cardinality inequality takes the sum of all variables on the left hand side, while these have a subset of variables.
Yeah.
So these are actually different from minimum cardinality.
Actually, sorry. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me, Professor Agrawal. Yes, they are not. So actually, in fact, none of these is actually a minimum cardinality equality or a knapsack cover inequality, right? Now the question is, how can you generate them? And that's where we'll use polar duality to generate. So what we'll show is actually using polar duality, you can generate any of these facets to the problem, right? And without worrying about what class they come from, whether they come from knapsack cover inequality or whether they are minimum cardinality equality, without worrying about that, you can blindly generate all of them by solving the polar dual problem. Okay, so let's see how we do that. So first, let's understand what is polar dual. So given a polyhedron P in n-dimensional space, right? Its polar is another polyhedron in n+1 dimension, right? And it is that polyhedron whose feasible points are the valid inequalities of the original polyhedron. Okay, so let me explain this using an example, what it means. So let's say this is a polyhedron given by this set of inequalities, right? and its polar dual will be another polyhedron in one dimension higher, which is n plus one dimension, right? And such that pi x minus pi naught is less than or equal to 0 is true for every x which is feasible to this polyhedron. So what this means is, you see a valid inequality for a polyhedron, I can write it as pi x is less than or equal to pi naught. So what it says is every feasible solution to the original problem polyhedron actually gives you the coefficient for the valid inequalities to the problem. Sorry. Sorry, let me repeat this. What it means is the constraint, the inequalities in this problem, in the polar dual, they are actually valid inequalities for this original, because they are satisfied by every solution to the original problem. These inequalities are satisfied by every feasible solution to the original problem, and hence they are actually valid inequalities for the original problem. So let us understand using an example. So this is a polyhedron. So this, you have a set of constraints, minus x1 less than or equal to 1, which in effect means x1 greater than or equal to 1. So x1 greater than or equal to 1 is actually right hand side of this constraint, this vertical line. You can construct all these, the boundaries of all these inequalities, and you'll get a polyhedron like this. And if you look at the corner points, so these are the 4 corner points of this polyhedron. If I look at the polar dual of this, the polar dual of this will be something like this. So you pi 1, pi 2, and pi naught. So pi 1 is associated with x1, pi 2 is associated with x2, and then you have another variable called pi naught. So this is in one dimension higher, right? And so these are, this is the polar duality. These are the inequalities in the polar dual. Now let me see how we arrive at this. And for certain classes of problems, you can also show that actually pi naught can be easily normalized to 1. Especially when you normalize them to 1 and it does not change the sign of the inequality, you can safely actually normalize all of pi naught to 1. And this is the case for this particular example. So pi naught will turn out to be 1 in this particular example. Now, if I set pi naught equal to 1, then this reduces to 2 dimensions because the only variables are pi 1 and pi 2, right? Now, what you see is, if you see this, so this inequality. So so what it says is this polyhedron, the polar dual, this polyhedron, actually the feasible solution of it gives a valid inequality to the original polyhedron. And if you take the extreme rays of this polyhedron, then they will give you the facets of this original polyhedron. So generally this would be actually unbounded. This polyhedron would be unbounded, but because we have bounded this by normalizing pi naught to 1, this becomes bounded in this case. So extreme rays now become extreme points. So look at the extreme points of this. Let's say 0, 1. So 0, 1 will give you one of the facets of the original polyhedron. So any extreme point of this will give a facet of the original polyhedron. So if you look at 0, 1, 0, 1, so pi 1 is 0 and pi 2 is 1. And what is the inequality? Inequality is pi times x is less than or equal to pi naught, where pi naught is 1. So our inequality is, if I substitute pi 1 is equal to 0 and pi 2 is equal to 1, then my valid inequality is 0 into x1 plus 1 into x2 is less than or equal to 1, which is this inequality. So you see, this corner point gives me this inequality, and which is this facet, right? And if you look at this corner point of this polyhedron, this extreme point actually is minus 1 into x1 plus 0 into x2 less than or equal to 1, which is this facet. This facet is this one. Similarly, if you look at minus 1 comma minus 1, which is this extreme point of this polyhedron, this gives me this facet, which is minus x1 minus x2 is less than or equal to 1, which is actually this one, this facet. And the other 3 comma 1, if you look at this extreme point, this gives me 3x1 plus x2 is less than or equal to, which gives me this facet, which is this one, right? So what we see is every corner point of this polyhedron, if it is bounded, otherwise every extreme ray of this polyhedron will give you a facet of the original polyhedron, right? That is polar dual. Now let's see how this will probably become clear once we see how we are going to apply to this problem, to our current problem. Now the question is, how do you use this polar dual to generate valid inequalities for our problem? So our original problem is this, and we want to generate valid inequalities using polar duality to this problem. Is that clear? Now, so that means I have to write the polar dual, right, where I will have inequalities which is satisfied by every solution to this original problem polyhedron. So that means I need to get all the feasible solutions to this problem, or at least the extreme points, all the extreme points of this original polyhedron, which is practically not possible for a large size problem, because the number of extreme points will be huge. Even if you are able to generate all the extreme points of the original of this polyhedron, right, solving the polar dual itself will be too difficult, because it will result in a very large polar dual. So that's not a feasible approach. In theory, it looks okay, but that's not practical. So the question is, how do we apply polar dual such that the polar dual is not too large to solve, right? Okay, so let's go back to our original problem. This is the LP relaxation, and let's again take the same cut set inequality, which separates the graph into two parts, one containing nodes 1, 2, and 4 on one side, and 3 on the other side. Okay, so the cut set inequality for this is 14x13 plus 13x23 plus 10x43 should be equal to 18, right? That was our cut set inequality, which says that you should have enough capacity on the arcs crossing from one side of the partition to the other side to support the demand that you need, that you have to flow from one side to the other, right? So this is the cut set inequality that we have looked at earlier. Now, if you look at all the feasible solutions to this that satisfy this cut set inequality. So what are the all feasible solutions to this cut set inequality? So left hand side should be greater than equal to 18. So if you just take x13 is 1 and the other 2 0, on the left hand side you will have only 14, which is not greater than 18, right? So 1 0 0 is not a feasible solution. Similarly, 0 1 0 is not feasible. 0 0 1 is not feasible, right? But you can see is 1 1 0 is feasible, because 1 1 0 gives you a capacity of 27, which is greater than 18. Similarly, 0 1 1 is feasible. So you can construct all feasible solutions, and it is quite easy for this cut set inequality. You can get all the feasible solutions, integer feasible solutions. Is that okay? Which we denote as sigma. Now, once we have, so we need inequalities which are satisfied by all the feasible solutions of the original polyhedron to construct the polar dual. Because we have all the feasible solutions to the original polyhedron, and when I say original polyhedron, I'm talking about the cut set polyhedron corresponding to the cut set inequality. So I can write the valid inequality, the constraints in the polar dual. So for example, this will give you one constraint in the polar dual. So this gives me 0 into pi13 plus 1 into pi23 plus 1 into pi43 is less than or equal to pi 0. This one gives me 1 into pi13 plus 0 into pi23 plus 1 into pi43 is less than or equal to pi 0. This one gives me 1 into pi13 plus 1 into pi23 plus 0 into pi43 less than or equal to pi 0. You can see, so there are 4 inequalities corresponding to each of the each of the feasible solutions of the original polyhedron for this cut set inequality. Right now we have actually constructed the polar dual, which is not too large for this cut set inequality. Right? Okay. Now, now the question is, how do you generate the valid inequality which is violated? Right?
Well,
Polar dual.
how did you get the bounds -1 and 1, and how did you get the objective?
Yes. Actually, I was trying to avoid this one because this required a little bit of explanation. So let me go back. So if what I said is the polar dual for a polyhedron in n dimension, the polar dual will be a polyhedron in n plus 1 dimension, right? And that will be unbounded. But somehow, if for some kinds of problems, we can actually say that pi naught we can normalize it to 1, and that becomes a bounded polyhedron. So if we don't know whether we can normalize pi 0 to 1, then this will be unbounded. So actually, this will be an unbounded polyhedron. So this will be actually a cone, polyhedral cone, right? Now, if we want to solve it as an optimization problem to find out the most violated valid inequality, you will get an unbounded. It will say this is unbounded. You will not get a corner point, right? So to get a corner point, right, to find out the most violated inequality, we have to somehow bound it. Otherwise, when you solve over an unbounded polyhedron, the optimization problem will say that it is unbounded. So this is to bound it. There are other, you can actually generate the violated inequalities even for the unbounded polyhedral cone, but that becomes a little technical, and I'm avoiding that technicality in this talk. That's why I'm doing this. But it is possible without bounding this also, it is possible, which I'm avoiding in this talk.
Okay. And the objective is
yes. So let me come to the objective. What is the objective? Remember, we want the most violated inequality, because the more it is violated, the deeper will be the cut, right? Remember the figure that I showed you for valid inequalities, right? So if you get more inside the polyhedron, the deeper will be the cut, right? And the closer it will take you to the IP optimal solution. So we are interested in finding the most violated inequality. So what is a violation of an inequality? So violation of the inequalities means the left-hand side, because it's less than equal to constraint, if the left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side, that means the inequality is violated. Is that right? All right. So we want an inequality that is most violated by the current LP solution, right? So if I write the valid inequality corresponding to the current LP optimal solution, so x13 is, if you look at x13, it is 0.57, x23 is 0.62, and x43 is 0.20. So 0.57 pi13 plus 0.62 pi23 plus 0.20 pi43 ideally should be less than equal to pi0 for this to be valid, right? Only then the current LP solution satisfies this. But I want a valid inequality which is violated by the current LP optimal solution. Only then it is useful, right? So that means it is violated only when the left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side, because your valid inequality was less than left-hand side being less than equal to the right-hand side. So if left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side, then valid inequality is violated and it is useful. So I want the maximum violation of this valid inequality. So that's why I'm trying to maximize this. And that gives you an optimization problem. So if you solve this, the solution to this will give you the most violated valid inequality. In fact, it will give you the most violated facet of the convex hull of this polyhedron, of this cut set inequality. So let's see what is the solution to this. If you solve this, you get pi0 is equal to -1, pi13 is equal to -0.5, pi23 is equal to pi4 is equal to -0.25. So that means our valid inequality, remember, if you go to the previous slide, our valid inequality was this, pi x minus pi naught less than equal to 0. So pi x less than equal to pi naught. And so if you write this, then you have minus 0.5 x13 minus 0.5 x23 minus 0.5 x43 less than equal to -1. If you multiply both hand side by -1, you get 0.5 x13 plus 0.5 x23 plus 0.5 x43 greater than equal to 1. That is your valid inequality. Now you can multiply the left hand side and right hand side by 2 just to make all the coefficients integral. What you get is x13 plus x23 plus x43 is greater than equal to 2, which is your minimum cardinality inequality for this cut set inequality. Remember? So actually polar dual actually has given me this minimum cardinality inequality. It so happens that in this case, the most violated facet is the minimum cardinality inequality, but it could have been any other inequality, which we were not even aware of. Just for this example, it gives me a minimum cardinality.
Is that a question?
Yes, please.
Jyotirmay, you want to ask that?
Yes, Jyotirmay, please go ahead.
Hi, Sachin. A quick question, but I think I figured that out now. So pi0 is a variable, decision variable.
Yes, pi naught is a decision variable.
Okay. Yeah, and it is unrestricted. So it is not between -1 and +1, right?
Actually, ideally, all of them are unrestricted and you'll get extreme rays. But if the polyhedron is unbounded, then you can't solve the optimization problem to find out the most violated inequality. So somehow you have to bound all of them. So all of them, I should have also listed pi naught. Pi naught is also good.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yes, that's what.
That's okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jyotirmay. Okay, sorry. So now we have actually discovered a violated inequality, which turns out to be a minimum cardinality equality by coincidence in this case. If we add this, so if you add this, now what you see is your lower bound improves from 155.923 to 163 point something, which is what we had seen earlier when we had added the same minimum cardinality inequality earlier when we discussed, right? Okay. So now what next? So what we can do is actually we can now look at all possible cut set inequalities. We can get different cut set inequalities by looking at different partitions of the graph, right? And from each cut set inequality, we can find out the most violated facet of that polyhedron for that cut set inequality. So if you do this, for example, right now we had looked at partition 1, 2, 4 on one side and 3 on the other side. And this was the violated inequality or the violated facet that we had found out. So this one was x1 3 by 2 plus x2 3 by 2 plus x4 3 by 2 greater than or equal to 1. Similarly, if we, after adding this, if we again actually solve for the most violated inequality from the same partition, it gives me another inequality. After adding this from the same partition, again I can get another valid inequality. You can see the second one is actually a knapsack cover inequality. The third one is again a minimum cardinality inequality. Now after this, you'll probably, it will say that there's no valid inequality which is violated for this current partition. So you'll have to go to another partition. So now we look at a partition where 1 and 2 are on one side and 3 and 4 are on the other side. And look at the cut set inequality and ask what is the most violated facet for the polyhedron for this cut set inequality. And you will, by doing this, you can actually keep getting new and new valid inequalities. So we actually were able to find 16 valid inequalities from 2 partitions using polar duality, right? And at the end, we have now a LP relaxation solution, which gives me an objective function of 198.29 from 155. So this is the improvement with 2 partitions. Okay, so let's look at the problem once again. Our IP optimal was 210. A lower bound, LP relaxation lower bound was 155, which represented an optimality gap of 25.75%. When we've added all the valid inequalities that we generated using polar duality from 2 partitions, all possible 2 partitions, we are able to reduce this gap down to 5.57%. So it's already so close to the IP optimal. We could have given it to branch and bound tree at this stage, right? And hope the branch and bound to actually solve the problem in comparatively less time compared to what it would have taken if we had given simply immediately after the LP relaxation. But we can do still better than this. So the question is, can this gap be reduced further? Okay, well, this can be. So now what we can do is we can go to 3 partitions. So this is the solution that we have so far after we have added all the 2 valid inequalities coming from 2 partitions. So let's look at 3 partitions. This is just one of the 3 partitions. You can get any. I mean, there are other ways in which you can partition this into 3 subsets. So this partition divides the graph into 3 different subsets of nodes. So one subset contains only node 1, the other one contains only node 3, and the third subset contains node 2 and 4, which are shrunk into a single node, which we'll denote as 2 prime. So remember, 2 prime is 2 and 4 shrunk together into one node. Now this is how we get a 3 partition, right? So this actually gives you a 3 node graph, and you can see for a 3 node graph, you have 6 possible arcs, right? So an arc connecting 1 to 2 prime, and so 6 possible arc groups, because an arc from 1 to 2 prime can have multiple arcs. One arc may be going from 1 to 2, and another arc may be going from 1 to 4, right? So I'm calling this 1 to 2 prime as a group of arc, may contain more than one arc, because 2 prime contains more than one node, right? And an arc from 1 may come to one of these nodes in 2 prime, or it may come to another node within this 2 prime. Is that clear? So this 3 node graph will contain 6 groups of arcs, and any group of the arc may contain more than one arc. Specifically, the arcs that are coming into 2 prime or going out of 2 prime may contain more than one arc, because this contains more than one node. Is that clear? Okay. Now what we can do is we can actually now we have a 3 node graph. We can again now generate cut set inequalities for this. So this is one cut set inequality which says so let's look at the total demand that we need. So the numbers that you see on this graph, these are actually the demand that you need to satisfy. So for example, from 1 to 2 prime, we need a demand of 15. How is that coming? So if you look at 1 to 2, 1 to 2, there is a demand of 8. And 1 to 4, there is a demand of 7, right? And because 2 and 4 are shrunk into a single node 2 prime, so 1 to 2 prime, actually the total demand is this 8 plus this 7, which are coming from 1 to this 2 prime. So the total demand of 15, which is what I have listed here. Similarly, if you can look at this graph, you can figure out from 2 prime to 1, you need a demand of 8 units. And so those are listed here. Now, if we look at a cut set, which, okay, Sumit has a question. Any reason for bold and dotted lines in this graph? Yes, Sumit, that's right. Why I have shown some of them as bold and some of them as dotted? The ones that are in bold, those are the graphs that are representing the cut set. So I'm talking about a cut set consisting of arcs going out from 1. So what are the arcs that are going out from 1? The ones that are in bold, those are the only ones that are going out from 1. So 1 to 2 prime and 1 to 3, these are the arcs, right? And so the arcs, and what is the demand that is going out of 1? You need a demand of, support a demand of 15 from 1 to 2 prime and 8 from 1 to 3. So total you need to support a demand of 23 going out of 1 to different nodes, right? So you should have arcs originating from node 1 that should have a total capacity of at least 23, and that is your cut set inequality, right? So what are the arcs going out of 1 to 2 prime? So you can see from 1 to 2 prime, 1 to 2 prime, you have 1 to 2, which is x12, and 1 to 4, x14, because node 2 and 4, they are shrunk into node 2 prime. So from 1 to 2 prime, you have these two arcs, 1 to 2 and 1 to 4, right? And so the capacities they will support is 11x12 plus 14x14, depending on the values that x12 and x14 are given. And there is another arc that goes out from 1, which goes from 1 to 3, that has a capacity of 14, so plus 14x13. So this is the total capacity depending on how many arcs you are opening, right? And that should support a total demand of 23. So the left hand side should have a value of at least 23. That's what the cut set inequality says, right? Now again, this cut set inequality will always be satisfied because of the flow balance constraints. And if you plug in the values from this optimal solution, so you see 11 into 0.08. So 11 is the capacity, and x12 in this problem, in this solution, x12 has a value of 0.88. Similarly, if you plug in all the other values, the left-hand side turns out to be 25.375, which is greater than 23 that is required on the right-hand side. So this is always satisfied. This is a valid inequality, but useless because if it is already satisfied, what do you get out of it, right? We want a violated inequality. So how do you generate a violated inequality from this? We'll use R-Pooler duality. So now let's look at another cut set. Now this cut set, if you look at the bold arcs, they are different from the previous one. So here we are talking about the arcs that are entering into node 1 from various nodes. So you have arc coming from node 2 prime to 1 and arc coming from node 3 to 1, right? So the cut set inequality is 11x21, 2 to 1, and 14x41, 4 to 1, right? Plus 14x31 greater than or equal to 23. And if you see, actually, this will also be satisfied by the current solution because all cut set inequalities will also always be satisfied by the current solution. Okay. Now, let's look at another inequality, which is not a cut set inequality, but here what we are saying is, let's look at the flows that are supposed to go from node 1 to node 2 prime directly, and also the flows that can go indirectly, that can go indirectly from node 1 to node 2 prime via some other node, via node 3, right? So if you look at from node 1 to 2 prime, you need a flow of 15, right? And from node 1 to 3, there is a flow of 8. And from 3 to 2 prime, there is a flow of 5 to 3 that you need to support, This is the demand. So 15 plus 8 plus 8, 23 plus 8, 31. You need to support a total demand of 31 by opening these arcs. Now, I'm not saying this is a valid inequality, right? The question is this a valid inequality? So if you look at, if you substitute the values of all the different variables from the current LP optimal solution, you'll see actually this inequality is also satisfied. Is this just a coincidence, or will such an inequality always be satisfied? This is not a cut-set inequality. And the answer is yes, this will always be satisfied, but we don't know the logic why they will be satisfied. At least in the cut-set inequality, the logic was clear. You need this much of flow going out of a node, so the arcs going out of that node should have enough capacity to support those flows. But here, there is no logic using which we can say that this should always be valid. But this is indeed true. Mathematically, actually, you can show that they are always valid. Let us show why they are valid. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll first go back to our cut-set inequality. Cut-set inequality consisting of arcs going out from node 1. So what are the arcs going out of node 1? 1 to 2 prime, which consists of arcs 1 to 2 and 1 to 4. So they have capacity 11x12 plus 14x14, and arc 1 to 3 is 14, has a capacity of 14x13, right? And this minus 15 and minus 8, this 15 and 8 are the demands that they need to support, right? So the cut-set inequality was 11x12 plus 14x14 plus 14x3 should be greater than equal to 23. So in fact, this is actually the capacity. These two inequalities, if I add them, the ones that are in red, if I add them, this will give me the total capacity minus the total demand supported by the arcs in this cut set. So this I can write in general, C minus D is great, where C is the capacity supported by all the arcs, minus D is the demand that needs to flow on those arcs, should be greater than or equal to 0. For the inequalities that are in red. So if I write all the inequalities, then I can actually also use a vector of 0 and 1, and I can actually multiply these inequalities by this vector, where I have one only for those inequalities which are in this cut set. So the rest of the expressions will not add up to the left hand side. Only those will add up which are actually supporting this cut set. So if I use one in pi 1 2 prime and one in pi 1 3, that means, and I multiply this vector by this vector, I will get some like this. So in general, I can write this inequality as mu times C minus D greater than or equal to 0, where mu is given by this vector for this particular cut set. Similarly, if I use a different cut set, then in this cut set, my inequality was 11x plus 14x41 plus 14x31 should be greater than or equal to 23. So if I want to only include in my expression these two expressions, the ones in the red, then I can actually multiply these this vector by vector of 0 and 1s, where we have ones only correspond. Sorry, this one is not in the right place. Okay, so 2 1. So this the second one. Sorry. Okay, let me skip this because this is not correct. Let me come to a different inequality. So let's look at this inequality. This inequality said that sum of this plus this plus this should be greater than or equal to 0. That means the total capacity should be greater than or equal to the total demand that was supported by these arcs on this inequality. So if I just want to add the expressions on the left hand side corresponding to the ones that are in red, then what I can do is I can actually multiply them by one here, and one here, and the rest will actually not be added because we are giving them a weight of 0, right? So this again, we can write this as mu times C minus D greater than or equal to 0. And in fact, there is a well-known Japanese theorem which says that all these inequalities will be valid for our current problem as long as this vector of mu has components which satisfy all possible triangular inequalities. And if this vector of mu satisfies all possible triangular inequalities, then it is called a metric. And the corresponding inequality is called a metric inequality. So let's see whether this vector satisfies the triangle inequality or not. So you have mu1, 2 prime, right? So from going from 1 to 2 prime, and then from 2 prime, so 1 to 2 prime. So you can go from 1 to 2 prime, right? Or you can go from 1 to 3 and then 3 to 2 prime. So you can go directly from 1 to 2 prime, or you can go indirectly from 1 to 3 and then 3 to 2 prime, right? So triangular inequality says that if you go directly from 1 to 2 prime, then the distance should be shorter than the distance that you will need to go from 1 to 3 and then 3 to 2 prime, right? So that means this pi 1 2 prime, which is the distance directly from 1 to 2 prime, should be smaller than the distance that you have to cover if you go from 1 to 3 and then 3 to 2 prime, which is pi 1 3 plus pi 3 2 prime. So you see this satisfies the triangle inequality because 1 is less than equal to 1 plus 1. And you can take all possible triangles, you can construct all possible triangles from this, right, on this graph, and you'll see that this particular vector of mu will satisfy all triangular inequalities. And because it satisfies all triangular inequalities, this is a metric. This mu vector is a metric, right? But you can see actually you can actually find infinite solutions for this mu vector which will satisfy triangular inequalities. This is not a unique vector. You can get infinite possible mu vector which will satisfy the triangular inequality, and they will in fact actually form a cone. But we don't need to worry about all these metric inequalities. What we need only are the extreme rays of this cone, and the extreme rays of this cone are called primitive metric inequalities. So if you satisfy the primitive metric inequalities, all the metric inequalities are already satisfied, right? So, and for a 3-node problem, this paper actually the authors have already found out what are the primitive metric inequalities. So there are 12 metric inequalities for a 3-node graph. So if you satisfy these 12 metric inequalities, right, then if any solution satisfies all these 12 metric inequalities, then that solution will be feasible to the original problem. So any solution which is feasible to the original problem should satisfy these 12 primitive metric inequalities. Now the question is, how are we going to use this? So because any feasible solution should satisfy all these, right? What we can do is we can actually construct a polar dual corresponding to the polyhedron corresponding to this 12. But the polar dual polyhedron will be large because, if you have a very large problem, then you'll have a lot of, and if you take a 3 partition of that graph, you'll have a lot of arcs. For the current problem, you have an R group from going from 1 to 2 prime, an R group from 2 prime to 1, an R group from 1 to 3, an R group from 3 to 1, an R group from 2 prime to 3, and an R group from 3 to 2 prime, right? So for a large problem, if you partition this into a 3-node graph, right, it can support a lot of arcs because each shrunk node will have a lot of nodes that are shrunk into it, and it can each arc group will actually have a lot of arcs. So the polar dual can become very large, and solving it will become extremely difficult because we have to solve this polar dual iteratively in our cutting plane approach. So we want to reduce the size of the polar dual. So we can do that. Now what we can do is, instead of considering all these 12 primitive metric inequalities, we can look at only a subset of them. So if you take only one of them, if you construct the polyhedron for this will be more restrictive, but if you take only one of the constraints, the polyhedron corresponding to this will be more relaxed. And hence the valid inequality generated from the polyhedron corresponding to only one valid inequality will be much weaker corresponding to the valid inequality that is violated for the polyhedron corresponding to all these values. So what I'm saying is, if you take all these metric inequalities, polyhedron corresponding to all these metric inequalities, and construct the polar dual and find the violated inequality, that will be much tighter. But if you take only one of them, the polar dual will be substantially smaller, but the inequality may be weaker. So let's look at one of these metric inequalities. So for example, let's look at this one. This is a metric inequality, right? So it supports arcs 1 to 2 prime, 1 to 3, and 3 to 2 prime. Now, if I write a polar dual corresponding to this, this will involve variables pi12 prime, pi13, and pi32 prime. But if you see, I can actually make I can get tighter valid inequalities by adding more constraints to this problem. So if I add, let's say, inequality 4 and inequality 1, you can see that it is not adding any new arc group. You see the same arc that was there, the same pi12 prime was already there in the valid metric inequality 7. This was also there. This was also there. So if I add metric inequality 1 and metric inequality 4 to metric inequality 7, I'm not increasing the size of the problem because it's not adding any additional variable. But it is adding more constraints without involving any new set of variables. So the violated inequality will be much tighter, and the polar dual is not going to increase in size because we are not adding any variable. And so metric inequality 1, 4, and 7 is something we call as a substructure. And we actually identify similar substructures from the set of metric inequalities that we have. So the metric inequality 1, 4, and 7, we'll call it as M1C2, which means C1 and 4 are cut set inequalities and 7 was a non-cut set inequality. So C2 means there are 2 cut set inequalities, M1 means there is 1 non-cut set inequality. And we can identify similar substructures such that it involves as many inequalities as possible without increasing the size of the polyhedron. Okay, so now we have found a substructure. Let's construct the polar dual. So if you look at the substructure, this consists of these 3 metric inequalities, right? So what are these 3 metric inequalities? So one metric inequality is given by this mu vector, which means you add this expression plus the third expression because you have 1 in first place and third place in this vector. And the second inequality says that you add this first and the sixth one. And the third inequality says you add the first, third, and the sixth one, right? So you have 3 inequalities. And to construct the polar dual, we want to look at all the feasible solutions of this polyhedron. So if we look at all the possible solutions of this polyhedron, these are the 3 inequalities that we have to satisfy, which are actually coming from the 3 metric inequalities. Now, so it's not very difficult for this small problem because the polyhedron is still small. This is a small problem. You can verify that there are actually 12 integer feasible solutions to this problem. And if we write, so the polar dual will have 12 different inequalities. I have not listed all of them. I've listed only 6, but there are 6 more inequalities, one corresponding to each of these integer feasible solutions for the primal problem, right? And if you now we want to find out the most violated facet to this polyhedron. And if you solve this, you get this as the solution, and this gives you the valid inequality. Now this is violated. How do we know that this is violated? Because z is positive. That means in this case, this was the left-hand side of your valid inequality and pi naught was the right-hand side. This means that the left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side. And the valid inequality was actually left-hand side being less than equal to. So this says that the left-hand side is greater than the right-hand side, which means the inequality is violated. And because we have been able to find a violated inequality, we can add this. So if you write this, this will give you minus x12 plus x13 plus x14 plus x32 plus x34 is greater than 1. And if you look at this valid inequality, there is no known class of valid inequality which you could have given you this. This is not a knapsack cover inequality. This is nor a minimum cardinal inequality. If you are aware of any other class of inequality, this belongs to none of them. There's no way we could have generated them. And this comes only from our polar dual, right? So our polar dual is able to give inequalities which are otherwise not known to belong to any other class and are very difficult to generate using any known logic. So now what we can do, and we see that this is violated because if you substitute the current LP optimal solution, you see this inequality is violated. So we can add this. If you add this, your lower bound actually improves marginally. You can say this. And let's look at in terms of the optimality gap, this reduces to 5.25%. So let's see what we have done so far. Integer optimal was 210. The LP bound, pure LP bound was 25.75%, the optimality gap with that. And the optimality gap with only 2p the inequalities generated from two partitions using polar duality reduce this optimality gap to 5.57%. If we further added one valid inequality generated using polar dual from three partition, this further reduced to 5.25%. But there's no reason to stop here. We can generate many more such inequalities from polar dual as long as they are violated, and from several other partitions that we can create. We've created only one possible partition. We can create other partitions as well. So if we do this, now what we see is we are able to generate from 17 to 25, which is nine more inequalities from three partitions. And the first four are coming from the substructure that I just explained, M1C2. The last five are coming from a substructure which essentially consists of the whole polyhedron. That is all 12 metric inequalities. Now, what is the lower bound? After we add all the inequalities corresponding to the 2p and 3 partition inequalities, our lower bound actually improves to 203.67. So let's see what is the impact on the optimality gap. The optimality gap is now down to 3.02%. We can stop here and give it to the branch and bound search to look for the optimal solution, integer optimal solution. But we can do something better. We can actually now go to 4 partition. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into the details of 4 partition, and this is where actually lies one of our contributions, because 4 partition based metric inequalities is not something researchers have looked at. So we have looked at the 4 partition based metric inequalities, and we were able to identify 164 primitive metric inequalities that need to be satisfied. And corresponding to that, then we identified substructures as we did in 3 partition, and we generated violated inequalities. And you can see these are the valid inequalities 26, 27, and 28. They are generated from 4 partition. And you see these inequalities are very interesting. So coefficient of 2 by 7, 1 by 7, and so on. There is no way you could have actually arrived at these valid inequalities from any known class of valid inequalities. For example, they are neither cover inequalities, they are not minimum cardinal inequalities, nor do they belong to any other known family of valid inequalities, right? So they can only be obtained from polar duality. And after we add all of them, now you see after adding all 4 partition inequalities, our optimality gap has reduced to 0.9%, less than 1%. We can now, because there are only 4 nodes, you can't actually have a 5-node partition, right? So for a 4-node problem, now there's no other inequality that you can generate from partitioning this graph. So you have to give it to the branch and bound tree, and you can solve this. But now the branch and bound tree will take sufficiently less time because our bound is already very close to the integer optimal solution. Bound is already close to 0. But for larger instances, you could go to 5 partition, 6 partition, 7 partition. But if you go to 5, 6, 7 partition, finding out the metric inequality, primitive metric inequalities will be very difficult for them. So we stop at 4 nodes. We don't go beyond 4. So we stop. We don't go beyond partition. Yes.
Actually, the main reason for not going to 5 or 6 partitions is that your polar dual will become simply too big and unmanageable.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, even for 4 partitions, we rarely use the full 4 partition, which involves all the constraints and all the value, because the polar becomes too big to solve. So we confine ourselves only to certain substructures of the 4-node problem, which are manageable.
Right. Exactly.
That is really the main reason for not going to 5.
Right, and that's the reason why we looked at identified substructures from 3 partition and 4 partition, so that they don't involve all possible arcs in the polar dual construction. Okay, so now we can give it to branch and bound tree for this particular example. And if you give it to branch, of course, our optimal solution will be 210 that we saw earlier. Now, so let's look at our algorithm. Let's summarize the algorithm, what we have done. So I'm going to not take more than probably 5 or 10 minutes. I understand I've already taken close to 1 hour and 25 minutes. The reason being that this was technical and I needed some time to go through the background, but I'll not take more than 5 minutes, I hope. And then we can take some questions. So what is the algorithm? So first you solve the LP relaxation of this problem, right? And once you solve the LP relaxation, what you can do is now generate a 2 partition of the graph. And from the 2 partition, right, you find out the violated facets of the polyhedron corresponding to this 2 partition. And then add those inequalities add the inequality and resolve it. And keep doing this as long as you are able to find some violated inequality. Once you exhaust all two partition based valid inequalities and you're not able to find any other violated inequality, go to 3 partitions. And why do we first do 2 partition? Because 3 partitions will involve more variable than 2 partitions, right? So the polar dual will be larger if you do it to 3 partition. Polar dual for 4 partition will be even larger. So after we exhaust all 3 partitions, we are not able to find any violated inequality from 3 partition. We go to 4 partition, add all of them sequentially. And then after this, if we are not able to find any other violated inequality, we stop and give it to branch and bound, because there is no way we could generate any other value. And the branch and boundary will give us the integer optimal solution. Okay, so now the question is, how do you find a 2 partition or 3 partition or 4 partition that is likely to generate a violated inequality? Maybe you generate a 2 partition or a 3 partition and all the inequalities from them are already satisfied by the current solution. So the crux is you have to find a partition which is likely to give you a violated inequality. So how do we do this? For this, this is the separation problem that we have to solve. So you have to find out the most violated inequality, which is the separation problem, but here we have to use a heuristic. So what we do is, so for this, we define something called partition, demand of a partition. So for example, let's look at this 3 partition in this graph, of this 4-net graph. So if you look at this 3 partition, so from 1 to 2 prime, you need a demand of 8. From 1 to 3, you need a demand of 8. From 2 prime to 1, you need a demand of 8. From 1 to 2 prime, you need a demand of 15. From 2 prime to 3, you need a demand of 10, and so on. So the demands are given, right? So if we add the demands on all these arcs, right, that are going from one node to the other node in this partition, right, that gives you the demand of the partition. Right? So this is simply the sum of all the demands on all the node arcs that you see in this graph. Similarly, we can actually find out the partition capacity of the current LP relaxation solution. So if you look at, let's say, 1 to 2 prime, 2 prime consists of node 2 and 4. So 1 to 2, you have x1 2 is 0.88 and it has a capacity of 11. So 0.88 into 11, and 2 to 1, actually your LP optimal solution is 0.13. So x21 is 1.13 multiplied by the capacity is 11. So that's how you do this for all the arcs, and you get a capacity, total partition capacity of 66.5. Based on this, we can define a slack of this partition, which is the difference between the capacity and the demand, which turns out to be 12.5. Now we want to generate those partitions where actually this slack is as small as possible, and use that partition to actually find out a violated inequality using polar dual. What is the reason? The reason is if the slack is small, that means you do not have excess capacities on the arcs on which the flows are to be routed. So the lower is the excess capacity, the more is the chance that a valid inequality generated from this will be violated. That's the reason. And we have a local heuristic actually, which is built around this idea to find out the partition with the least slack. And so that's the heuristic we use for the separation. Now let's look at the computational results. So for computational results, we constructed a 12-node directed graph. So the number of nodes is 20, and we had 88 arcs in this graph. And the commodity density is 100%. What does it mean? That means so you have a demand that needs to be satisfied between every pair of nodes. So you have a demand from 4 to 9, you also have a demand from 9 to 4, you have a demand from 4 to 14, you also have a demand from 14 to 4. So that means all possible commodities we have taken. So there is a demand for every possible commodity in this case. And we generated the capacities of the arcs and the fixed charge on the arcs and the variable cost on the arcs by using this scheme. Now let's look at the result. So first, what we did is we ran the experiments without turning on the simplex cuts. So we said, let's see how effective are our polar cuts without the simplex cuts. So simplex can also generate its own cuts. Cplex has a very smart algorithm. It can identify a lot of cuts that it can add, but we disabled them. We generated only R cuts. So the first NC column is without any cuts, without any Cplex cuts, and without any polar cuts that we generated. So if you don't add any cuts, then the lower bound is, so the LP relaxation gives you a lower bound which is only 31% of the optimal. These are knapsack cover inequalities that Cplex could generate on its own, not from our two partition based polar duality. So Cplex, if we just generated all, so sorry, we Cplex could generate them, but we could also generate them because there is a very well known algorithm to generate the knapsack cover inequalities. When we generated all of them, the lower bound actually improved to 81.3% of the optimal. On top of them, if we also generated violated inequalities from two partition, you remember from two partition, some of the inequalities were already cover inequalities, but there were also minimum cardinality inequalities which are not cover inequalities that could be generated from two partition, and there can be some other inequalities as well. So if we generate those as well, then the lower bound improves marginally from 81.3% to 81.6%. If you go to three partition, then the lower bound improves to 83.7%. If you go to four partition, the lower bound improves to 85.1%. So it leaves a gap of close to 15%. That will leave the branch and bound tree to close. Now, if we use our polar generated cuts, and on top of them, if we also let Cplex to generate its own cuts, in that case, we see this is for no cuts, that means we have not generated any polar cuts, but allowed Cplex to generate its own cuts. In that case, because Cplex is generating additional cuts, the lower bound it improved from 31% to 57.3% because of the cuts that Cplex was able to generate. But if we allow Cplex to generate its cuts on top of the knapsack cover cuts that we have generated, then the lower bound improves from 81.3% to 82.2%. So what we see is, if we allow Cplex to generate its own cuts, then the lower bounds in each of these cases actually improves a little bit from 84.1% to 86% in this case. Now let's see what is the impact on the CPU time. Now what you can see is the first column without any Cplex cuts, without any of our polar cuts. If you try to solve these 20 node instances, they sound small instances, but if you try to solve them, we actually set a time limit of 10 hours. And in 10 hours time limit, none of them was able, and Cplex was not able to solve any of them. So wherever you see M, that means Cplex ran out of memory because it was the branch and the bound tree was taking too much of memory, and we eventually ran out of memory on our system. Wherever you see time, that means we reached the time limit. So even after 10 hours, Cplex was not able to solve it to optimality. If we just add the knapsack cover cuts, what was taking more than 10 hours, now on an average, we are able to solve them in 977 seconds, less than 1,000 seconds. So Sumit has a question, why does the optimality gap decrease after 4P? Sumit, can you come online and tell me what are you referring to?
In instance one with optimal with Cplex cut, so the lower table.
Okay, so the one that is in red, that's what you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good point to highlight. Okay, and that's why I have highlighted this in red. So what you see here is, if you don't add Cplex cuts, if you just add polar cuts, your lower bound was the optimality gap was 85% of the optimal. The lower bound was 85% of the optimal. But if you add Cplex cuts on top of our polar cuts, so Cplex is adding more cuts, right? So if you add Cplex cuts, then your actually optimality gap should close even further. Which is closing. So
is it because Cplex will add different cuts when 3P is there, and when 3P and 4P both are there, the cuts will be different by Cplex?
This is to highlight the fact that when you compare to 3P,
I think what he just said is, if I may.
Yes.
May I?
Yes, please. Yes, Professor. Yes.
Yeah. So I think what Sumit just said is absolutely correct. The Cplex has its own algorithms for discovering and adding these cuts. Now the effectiveness of those cuts can change. If we have added 3p or 4p inequality, if it's running its algorithms on top of 3p or 4p, it's not necessary it will generate the same set of cuts. It may generate a completely different set of cuts, and sometimes they may be more effective, sometimes they may be less effective.
Right.
So it seems in this case, Cplex was not able to generate very effective cuts after the addition of 4p.
Right.
That's why the bound slightly different.
Yeah. So this is to highlight that may also happen. That with 4 cuts, adding 4 cuts may actually give you worse optimality gap compared to 3p if you are also adding Cplex cuts. Because in presence of the polar cuts, Cplex may not be able to generate some of the cuts that it could have done otherwise, right? Okay, but the point here is, if you see, okay, so we were talking about the CPU times. The CPU time actually what was not able to solve in more than 10 hours. Now we see we can with 4p, we are able to solve this in 383 seconds on an average, which is less than, I guess, less than how much? Less than 10 minutes, less than 600 seconds, right? So from 10 hours, we have gone down to less than 10 minutes, which is drastic. Okay. Now let's see what happens if we add Cplex cuts on top of polar cuts. So again, if you compare this column with this column, you see adding Cplex cuts helps. We are only adding Cplex cuts, no polar cuts. So what was taking more than 10 hours, now we are able to solve this on an average 14,000 some seconds, right? Okay, so which is close to 3 hours. But now here, if we have added knapsack cover cuts, if you see, if you have already added your knapsack cover cuts, and if you add Cplex cuts on top of them, then actually the performance actually deteriorates. If you add 2p polar cuts, and if you add Cplex cuts on top of them, the performance deteriorates. So what it says is, if you add Cplex cuts on top of your polar cuts, then Cplex cuts are actually counterproductive. Instead of doing any good, they end up taking even more time. So what is the reason? Why are the Cplex cuts being counterproductive if you add them on top of your polar cuts? So to look at that, what we did was we actually defined something known as the depth of the cuts, which is how much is the improvement in the lower bound that you are getting per addition of 1 cut of that type, right? So if you measure this, then for 2 partition or knapsack cover cuts, the depth is 0.743. That means for every 1 single cut that you add, your lower bound improves by 0.743. If you add 3p on top of 2p cuts, then your lower bound improves by 0.092 for every cut that you add, and so on. So you see, if you have already added the polar cuts, Cplex cuts actually has very little effect, right? So it, in terms of improvement in the lower bound, it's very, very insignificant, but actually your size of the problem has increased significantly because you have added a lot of constraints. And that's why this becomes counterproductive. So let me quickly wind this up. This is probably the last slide. So now what we are showing is our polar cuts were very effective for the case where we were not using any flow costs. Flow costs were 0 in those instances. Now we want to actually add flow costs as well to our problems. So what we see is if you add only Cplex cuts, no polar cuts, then what you see is if you don't have any flow cost, then the problem is very difficult. But as you keep on adding flow cost to the problem becomes much easier, almost trivial to solve. 20 seconds, what was earlier taking close to 3 hours. But the trend is almost completely the reverse if you actually add polar cuts instead of Cplex cuts. So if you see, if we had 0 flow cost, then polar cuts was able to solve it in 383 seconds. But the moment we add flow cost, actually even in 10 hours, we are not able to solve them. So what it shows is that the polar cuts are very effective when we don't have any flow cost, but they are not, they are very highly ineffective the moment we have flow costs involved. And there is a reason to this. What is the reason? The reason is that, remember, I mean, all the polar duals that we constructed, they only involve the binary X variables, right? So they do not have any control of the flow variables. And now when you have flow cost involved, your optimal solution may be dictated by the flow cost, which may be dictated by the flow variables, which our polar duals have no control over because they are not generated based on the flow variables. They are merely based on the binary arc variables. So the moment you have flow cost involved, our polar cuts become highly ineffective. And I'll end it here. So there are other large instances from the data set that we ran over, and we have the results. But so what is the future direction that we want to take? We want to actually now generate cuts using polar duality for the cases where we also have flow costs involved, because right now they are highly ineffective when the flow costs involved. Can we generate cuts from polar duality for the case where we have flow costs involved and where they are effective as well? So I will end it here, and I'll be glad to take up any question from the audience, although I do realize that I have overshot the time, but I'll be happy to take any question now, or otherwise, if we have to really wind it up, I will be happy to take the questions either on through email or through phone call, whatever you want, medium you want to use.
Thank you, Sachin. I think you already had answered several questions on the way. But again, the floor is open. So if there are a few quick questions for Sachin, please go ahead. So Sachin, the question from Miles, did you already send it somewhere, and did you get any feedback, any other thoughts? Or
actually, this paper is currently under second round of revision in EJOR. We initially submitted it to OR. It could not make it to OR, although we were quite hopeful. So in the same format, without making even any changes, we submitted the same format to EJOR, and all the 3 reviewers were highly positive. So
that's very interesting, because I see the applications of this also in the EV vehicles, because you also are now thinking about, given the same kind of network structure, how can you really locate at what locations you want to have the charging stations and other things. So I think it'll have a lot of applications as well. So
yeah, so as long as you have fixed cost on the arts and some variable cost, and it's a network design problem, I think these inequalities will can.
Absolutely. Good. You really have a lot of popularity. Yes, Diptesh will not be waiting for that. So thank you, Sachin, for this wonderful talk, and we hope more such talks in the future. And yeah, I think with that we will close today's webinar, and we look forward to many such webinars in the future. Yeah, thank you so much again. Thank you.
Let me thank the audience as well for their patience for the last 1.5 hours. Thank you very much.